sir, I'm with the FBI. More people will come. And Francois said, yes, monsieur, but you will be dead. My mentor is a gentleman by the name of Francois Sicard. So Francois, his history is that he came to America with Luigi Canetti, who started Canetti Motors in New York and Greenwich, and became the first importer of Ferrari. It goes way back, and Canetti, relationship with Enzo Ferrari, and created this whole pipeline of Ferraris into the States. And Francois came as a mechanic bouncing around in Europe, got a job, and basically was brought in to work as a mechanic, factory trained. So he did the factory training in Italy, and then that way he could come to and work for Canetti. And then he moved up and eventually became chief mechanic to NART, North American Racing Team. So when Canetti closed in the 80s, and Francois went out on his own, and he had his own little workshop. He had his clients and would work on vintage Ferraris. And I guess that back then they were just Ferraris. They weren't called vintage. And so worked on everything from cow spiders, short wheelbases, and all that other stuff. And prices are always starting to go up. And GTO prices were, I don't know if they were necessarily 8-figure cars, but definitely in strong six, 7-figure cars. And he had a customer that bought one and wanted Francois to do the restoration on this GTO. Sure, he'd bring it over to his shop and he'd start the restoration. The guy would always pay in cash. He would always come, inspect the work. Here's the invoice. Every few months, come in, pay in cash. Francois is very French. Don't care where your money comes from. As long as it's green, pay on time. I keep doing the work. Rumor was that this guy wasn't 100% legal, but hey, listen, you pay your bills, it's fine. And they're passionate about the car, passionate about Ferrari. And this, again, is like one of those times where, yeah, GTOs were expensive, but people bought them because they wanted the GTO. I mean, the GTO was not just because it was an expensive car, it's because it's a race car that has history, and it's just like why anybody buys anything back then. It was just because it's a cool car, and if that's the cost of it, that's what he bought it for. One day, the guy shows up at Francois' shop and says, I'm going to pay you this current balance, but I may have to go away for a little bit because I'm in a little bit of trouble with the law, and I may have to just kind of disappear for a while. But I know that you're going to keep working on the car, but if for some reason I can't pay the bill and you can't get in touch with me, just put a mechanic's lien on the car. And Francois was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, because there might be a chance that I might not get out of this. Without saying so much, it's like, is he going to get arrested? Is he going to go to jail? But just put a mechanic's lien on it, and that's how you'll get paid for the rest of your car. Francois was thinking to himself, all right. And also on the other side, I was like, this is my chance to own a 250 GTO. Guy goes away. Then one day, somebody starts poking around at Francois' house. And Francois lives, his house is where he has his shop. So he starts, this guy starts walking around his property and poking and looking into the shop window. And he goes outside and he says, can I help you? And the guy's like, I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigations. I understand that your client is, Mr. So-and-so, and that he has a car that you are working on. And Francois right there was just, I know what this is about. He goes, get out of my property. You're trespassing, get off of my property. The guy was like, I'm with the FBI. We're doing an investigation. He's under a lot of, leave or else I'll shoot you. I'll go get my gun and shoot you. And the guy goes, but sir, I'm with the FBI. More people will come. And Francois said, yes, monsieur, but you will be dead. So the guy kind of hightailed his way off the property. He went away, and the next day they came back with a court order to repossess the car. They came to take the car. And the idea was that they were basically squeezing this person that was Francois' client. And it came out later was that what they were doing was they just basically froze all of his accounts. They were seizing all of his assets. And then the plan was that they were going to pressure him to basically turn some kind of evidence against the higher-ups. He must have been some kind of drug dealer, moving drugs into the country, and they had caught him, and they were trying to get him to turn in the other guys. Francois was so upset because he had no control when they came to repossess the car. They took it away, and that was the end of it. But what we found out later was that this guy was found dead in a motel room in somewhere, South America or somewhere. We could never figure out what had happened, was whether he was of no use to the government and they decided to get rid of him, or that the people that he was going to tell on got to him and off him. But that was the time that Francois came that close to owning a 250 GTO and had to let it go. That car is actually, it was in the papers. I remember seeing the article on Francois's wall in a Connecticut newspaper, and how it was done. And today that car is still around. I mean, there's only 36 GTOs, and it's kind of neat that for, let's say maybe a decade or something, that owner today now has this, $70 million, $80 million car. But like one day in its past had, was owned by a little nefarious owner. But that's what happens. GTOs are funny. They're the halo car. I mean, of the 60s and 70s. I mean, I think that whenever I talk to people, I've met a bunch of people who have had GTOs in their lives one way or another. They've written up in the magazines. It was a successful race car. I mean, guys who like all of us had read those car magazines about, we're all influenced by what we read, and these glorious races and this, all this romantic stories of this stuff. So then all of a sudden you see this car in the flesh, and let's say it's 5 or 6 years old, but it still has all the story and history. And that was the poster car of the, if there were such a thing, from the 60s and the 70s. And so I think people dream of them, and the cost of them is just what the cost was. I know that in the late 60s they were only worth $8,000 to $9,000, and then let's say in the 70s they were worth $20,000, and then by the 80s they start going into the 6-figure digit, 7 figures and 8 figures. It's just as with 36 cars, they all had some kind of history. They were all raced. They all were successful and good driving cars, and they just represented a time in which if you grew up in that era. And also, I believe that one of the reasons why GTOs became so valuable is because the children of the 50s and 60s also became very wealthy and successful in their businesses. So the fact that, there's only 36 available, and this whole generation of kids that read those magazines became successful and had the ability to spend money, just would outbid one another. And that's what bid this car up. It's like anytime these cars go up in value, it's because it's demand. And if I have money to outbid the next guy, that's what sets the price. Maybe it's the first car that became that valuable, but that's definitely, it had to be a number of factors. Good car, great history, people who had the money to buy it. I think the other reason why GTOs became so popular was because there's a time in which, because when you think about 250 or the 250 Ferrari, there's several different versions of them. There's the 250 TDF, there's the 250 Lusso, there's the 250 short wheelbase, there's the 250 GTO, there's also the 250 LM. Okay, so now think about the difference. So you've got a TDF, which is basically drum brakes and lever shocks. Okay, same engine displacement, same Colombo engine design. And then you go, or early Lampretis, but the 250 displacement engines, 3 liter, 12 cylinders. Then you go to the LM. LM is mid-engine transaxle, disc brakes. So that engine, the variations of those years, which is only about 6 years, transformed the cars, because the LM becomes a lot less streetable than a GTO. GTO was a Le Mans winning car, but you could drive it to the racetrack. You could drive it around town. It was still a race car. But once you started to get LMs and you started to get all the other GT cars that were, entered in, they're not street cars anymore. They become race cars. So I think some of that attraction is that it was one of the last few cars that you could still kind of jump in it, drive it like a regular car. LM is kind of a crazy street car. They put license plates on, but it wasn't like everybody's driving a 250 LM on the street. They did, but it wasn't as practical. I had a friend of mine that owned one for 40 years. He bought it in the late 60s and just recently sold it. It's a car that I've kind of been around for the last 15, 20 years. I've messed around with that one, ridden in it, drove around it. He offered me to drive it, and I turned it down. We were at Monticello, and Monticello was trying to sell him a membership, so they gave him a free test day. So he and his wife drives, like she's a SCCA license and does vintage racing. So she drove that track. You'd see it at Laguna every year, that GTO out there, or you'd see it at Lime Rock. So they brought their Comp Cobra real Comp Cobra and their GTO out to the track. And they told me the day, so I showed up just to hang out. So I was messing around with the cars and working with the mechanics and all this other stuff. If they needed me to run tires. At the end of the day, Jim goes to me, he goes, Tom, I'd really like you to drive the car. Really? Really? I said, and I thought about it, and it was just like, I said, I'm honored. I'm honored that you would let me drive your GTO. I know you've had it forever, and you don't let anybody else drive the car. Sandy's the only person that drives it. I said, but I am going to have to respectfully decline because I don't know if I could handle. And the reason behind it is not so much as just driving a GTO. GTO drives just like any other 250 car. I've driven short wheelbases, I've driven Lusos and all this stuff. At what point is it like, okay, if I've driven a $4 million car or a $10 million car, is it that much different than driving a $50 million car? Probably not. But the reason why I didn't do it is because on that test day, we were surrounded by GT3 cars. So these Porsche GT3 cars were lapping the track super fast, and all they wanted to do was pass the GTO. So whenever the GTO would go on the track, you'd have these Porsche guys just go, I gotta pass the GTO. So they're flying down, and you're just, you're driving it, but you're not driving the GTO at 10 tenths. You're driving it at like 7 tenths. And then you have this Porsche come up behind you, try to blow your doors off just so that, he could say that he passed the GTO. And I didn't know the track, so all I could think of is like, okay, I'm gonna take a right-hand drive 250 GTO on a track that I had never driven on before, with these guys try to show off to how much they could blow my doors off. I was like, no, thank you. So I told him I'd do the second best thing, which was I would ride shotgun. His mechanic was going to drive the car, and I actually videotaped it. In fact, I have it in my YouTube channel early from years ago when I shot it. But I was like, well, at least the very good thing is like, if I had driven it, no one would have shot video. So I actually have video of that day out on the track, so that was a lot of fun. But I couldn't do it. It was like one of these things where sometimes you get handed the keys to a car, and if you think too much about it, you'll chicken out. And do I regret it? Maybe, but I think I did the right thing.
No one should do a private party car deal without Caramel. During a car transaction, you've got a car, a title, and some money that's going to be changing hands, and I always tell everybody that neither side gets to have all three. But Caramel solves all of that because they verify the identities of both parties, they safely and securely connect to each side's bank account to manage the transfer of money, and they process your title and do all the DMV paperwork no matter what state the buyer or the seller are in. And for a limited time, Caramel is free to both buyers and sellers. They do allow you to add transportation and warranty products and things like that as you close your deal. So check them out now at drivecaramel.com or at the link in the description below.